I want to begin with the two places this reference document says the war is already reaching the moral center and the financial center. That is what makes this source more serious than it first appears. On the surface, it gives you what looks like a familiar package of wartime escalation. Iran S-warning poster, threats against American troops, claims about destroyed American assets, strikes across the region, Gulf exposure, carrier tracking, and Trump responding with denial and bluster. But the deeper structure is different. This document is not merely saying the battlefield is intense. It is saying the conflict is now starting to hit the two places an American presidency can least afford to have exposed at the same time. The place where a nation tells itself what is right and the place where a nation pays for what it does. That is the real story here. Start with the moral center. The source does not let the war remain an argument about platforms, missiles, bases, and shipping corridors. It keeps forcing the camera back down to bodies, children in a sports hall, parents pulling girls from rubble, schools and hospitals appearing on the front page of an Iranian paper as evidence of American-Israeli war crimes, the Pope saying that God rejects the prayers of leaders whose hands are full of blood. These are not side notes. They are the moral architecture of the piece. The source wants to make sure that even while the administration, right-wing media, and ordinary war coverage try to route attention toward tactical and partisan frames, the audience cannot escape the question of blood. Who is dying? Where, how, under what justification? And what does it mean for leaders to keep speaking the language of righteousness while that blood keeps accumulating? Fay Falasite, Fay turn 24 file 0 Fay. That is why the Pope section matters so much. It is not only about religion, it is about legitimacy. A war can survive criticism for a while. It has a much harder time surviving the sense that it is becoming morally indefensible in public language ordinary people. Understand, the source uses Pope Leo precisely that way. He becomes a counterweight to state spin, to right-wing silence, and to a White House posture that still wants to speak as though strength and faith can be claimed without judgment. Once a moral voice enters saying your prayers are rejected because your hands are full of blood, the conflict is no longer just strategic. It becomes accusatory in the oldest register, not are you winning, are you righteous? Fay file a site, Fay turn 24 file 0 Fay. That is one side of the pressure. Now look at the financial center. This is where the document is especially sharp. It points to the 30-year Treasury yield climbing toward levels associated with deep stress. It reminds the audience that rising yields do not stay in the world of charts and bond desks. They move into debt service, into mortgage rates, into business borrowing, into the federal budget, into the felt affordability of daily American life. That matters because it means the war is not only morally staining the administration, it is financially repricing the American state. And once that begins, the presidency is no longer managing a distant geopolitical conflict. It is managing a war that is beginning to enter kitchens, banks, construction plans, loan books, and household fear. Fay file site, Fay turn 24 file 0 Fay. That is why I think the source is not just accusing Trump of bad messaging, it is accusing him of failing at conversion. A serious presidency understands that every external shock must be translated into an honest account of internal cost. This source says Trump does the opposite. He keeps trying to convert external danger into personal image. Iran is weak. They are begging like dogs. They want a deal. Everything is under control. He remains in the register of humiliation theater while the war is converting itself into moral indictment on one side and financial penalty on the other. That is a very revealing mismatch. It suggests a presidency still trying to live at the level of ego while the system is being punished at the levels that actually matter. That is the deeper reason the source keeps tying together seemingly different stories. The aircraft losses, the abandoned bases, the Hormuz pressure, the Treasury yields, the Pope, the children, the Fox gas, price spin, the TSA funding chaos. These are not random insertions. They are all examples of the same governing style. Manufacture or worsen pain. Delay truthful explanation. Pretend to manage the pain. Ask for credit when partial relief arrives. Keep the public inside performance while the real costs move elsewhere. The source is telling us that this method, which may work for smaller domestic controversies, becomes much more dangerous in a war because the moral and financial consequences compound faster than narrative control can contain them. Fay file a site, Fay turn 24 file 0 Fay. And that is why the arsonist tackling the fires line works so well in the source. It captures the presidency as a producer of instability, posing as the answer to instability. The administration helps create the pressure. Then it speaks as though its chief role is to calm the very disruption it has amplified. But when the disruption reaches the moral center and the financial center at once, that pose starts to fail. People can sometimes be confused about strategy. They are less easily confused about mortgage pain. They are less easily confused about images of dead children. They are less easily confused when religious condemnation. battlefield vulnerability, and market stress all begin to move in the same direction. That is what makes the source document feel like more than a partisan attack. It feels like an argument that the conflict is now becoming legible to people who do not normally follow military details. You do not have to understand naval positioning to grasp the meaning of children dying in a gym. You do not have to understand missile ranges to grasp the meaning of mortgage rates becoming unaffordable. You do not have to understand carry operations to understand that when a president keeps talking like a television performer while the costs are spreading into ordinary life, something is fundamentally wrong. That is why the source treatment of Fox matters too. The network wants to keep the frame narrow, gas prices, Trump focused on relief, Trump cleaning up the mess. But the source insists on the opposite frame. He is not cleaning up the mess. He is implicated in making the mess. He is not merely late to the rescue. He is part of the reason rescue is required. That argument becomes stronger, not weaker, when you pair the financial strain with the moral indictment, because then the audience is not just asking whether the administration is competent, it is asking whether the administration deserves the authority it still claims. And that takes us back to Iran's ominous warning. The warning matters, yes, but not only because it threatens more violence, it matters because it arrives in a context where the American presidency is already vulnerable from both directions. The battlefield is widening outward while the critique is moving inward. The region is getting more unstable and the home front is getting more morally and financially brittle. That is a very dangerous combination for any government, especially one whose leader still wants to speak as if crude confidence can substitute for honest reckoning. This is why I think the phrase Iran gives ominous warning is slightly misleading if taken too literally. The more important warning may actually be the one embedded in the source itself. Not just that Iran is threatening the United States, but that the longer this conflict is handled through denial, spectacle, and minimization, the more likely it becomes that the war will permanently damage America where it is most fragile, in the credibility of its moral language and in the affordability of its economic life. That is not a small warning, that is a structural warning. And it is exactly why Trump's response feels so inadequate inside this document. He remains trapped at headline level while the crisis is moving into foundations, the foundation of right and wrong, the foundation of cost and debt, the foundation of what a presidency is supposed to protect. And once a war begins to strike foundations, it becomes much harder to govern through swagger. That is the deepest point in this reference document. The danger is not merely that the battlefield looks bad. The danger is that the battlefield is now rebounding into the moral center and the financial center of the country at the same time. And if a presidency still chooses performance over truth, at that moment, the damage it leaves behind may last much longer than the fighting itself.